The windmill stood on the edge of the small French village of Saint-Remy, its wooden blades still splintered from years of neglect. Once, it had been the pride of the valley, grinding wheat and rye for all the farmers in the region. But by the spring of 1943, under German occupation, it had become little more than a shadow, just another relic from better times. To most people, it was abandoned. To everyone except for one man, Henri Dubois. Henri was a farmer, 48 years old, with the kind of quiet strength that years of working the land gave a man. He lived with his wife, Elise, and their 16-year-old daughter, Marianne, in a farmhouse about a kilometer away from the old mill. Every morning, Henri rose before dawn to tend to the animals, pretending that life was as it always had been. But since the Germans had marched into their village 3 years earlier, nothing was normal anymore. Henri had seen neighbors disappear in the middle of the night. He'd watched the church bell taken down for its metal and the schoolhouse turned into a German command post. Soldiers patrolled the roads, demanding papers and taking what they pleased. But worst of all was the silence, the kind of silence that came from fear. People didn't speak openly anymore. Every whisper could be dangerous. Yet Henri was not as silent as he appeared. Hidden within the heart of the old windmill was a secret, one that could get him killed if anyone ever found out. Beneath the floorboards of the mill, beneath sacks of old grain and broken tools, lay a small table with a strange machine on top of it, a British-made radio transmitter. Henri was not just a farmer. He was the village's link to the resistance. It had all begun in late 1942, when a man named Jacques arrived at his farm one rainy night. Jacques had been a teacher before the war, a friend of Henri's brother, and now he was part of the resistance network operating out of Lyon. The Germans had tightened their control, but the Allies needed information about troop movements, supply convoys, and air defenses. Jacques had been sent to find someone in the countryside who could safely host a radio operator. Someone ordinary, someone the Germans would never suspect. Henri had agreed without hesitation. He'd watched as Jacques and 2 other men carried equipment into the windmill under cover of darkness. They'd wired everything carefully, connecting the radio set to a makeshift antenna hidden in one of the windmill's blades. When the windmill turned, the signal vanished into the hum of the countryside. No one, not even the sharp-eyed German officers, would think to look there. Every night, once Elise and Marianne were asleep, Henri would walk to the windmill, carrying a lantern shaded by cloth. He'd sit at the old table, plug in the earphones, and listen to the faint crackling of distant voices. London, sometimes. Other times, coded messages from nearby resistance groups. His task was to send reports. How many trucks passed the village road each day, which trains stopped at the station, whether new German soldiers had arrived. It was simple work, but deadly if discovered. The Germans had begun using special trucks that could detect radio transmissions. Henri had heard about arrests in neighboring villages, farmers taken away after being found with hidden transmitters. None of them were ever seen again. Still, Henri continued. Each night he sat in the cold windmill, jotting down messages on scraps of paper, listening to the ticking of the windmill's old gears above his head. He had grown used to the rhythm, the low creaks, the occasional rustle of rats, and the steady pulse of Morse code tapping through the earphones. But in May 1943, something changed. A new German officer arrived in Saint-Remy, Captain Friedrich Keller. Unlike the others, Keller wasn't lazy or cruel. He was methodical. He inspected farms personally, demanded detailed records, and started questioning people about unusual night activities. Henri's hands trembled slightly the first time Keller visited his farm. The officer smiled politely, his German accent crisp as he spoke French. "Your fields are well kept, Monsieur Dubois," he said. "You must be proud." Henri nodded, forcing a smile. "Oui, monsieur. The land is all we have." Keller's eyes drifted toward the distant windmill. "And that?" he asked. "It hasn't turned in years, has it?" Henri shrugged. "The wood is rotten. It's not worth repairing." Keller smiled faintly. "A pity. The Germans appreciate efficiency. We do not like to see good machines go to waste." That night, Henri could barely concentrate on his transmission. Every creak of the floorboards made him flinch. What if Keller came back? What if someone had seen the faint light in the windmill? He decided to move the transmitter deeper underground, beneath a false floor he built with old boards and straw. It took him 2 days to finish the job. When he finally turned on the radio again, his fingers shook as he sent his message to London. German officer inspecting rural properties. Likely searching for transmitters. Proceed with caution. For several days, Henri stayed away from the windmill altogether. Keller began visiting more farms, and rumors spread that someone in the region was transmitting to the Allies. The Germans had caught fragments of coded messages but couldn't locate the source. Then, one morning, Marianne came running to the house, breathless from school. "Papa," she whispered, "they're searching the village. The soldiers are everywhere." Henri looked out the window. 3 trucks had stopped by the main road, and soldiers were moving from house to house. Elise turned pale. "Henri, what will we do?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his coat and walked calmly toward the barn. Inside, he opened the hidden compartment beneath a pile of hay and pulled out a small pistol Jacques had given him. He hoped he'd never have to use it. By afternoon, the soldiers had reached his property. Keller was with them. "Routine inspection," Keller said when Henri came to meet them. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area." Henri's heart pounded, but he forced a smile. "Suspicious? Only chickens and cows here, Captain." The soldiers spread out, poking through the barn, the farmhouse, even the chicken coop. One of them began walking toward the windmill. Henri felt the blood drain from his face. "Wait," Keller said suddenly. "That structure is unstable, isn't it? I wouldn't want my men hurt by falling wood." Henri could have collapsed with relief. Keller turned to him again, studying his expression. "You seem nervous, Monsieur Dubois." "Only because you frighten the hens," Henri said quickly, forcing a laugh. Keller stared at him a long moment before nodding. "Very well. If I find that you've been hiding something from us, you'll regret it." When the soldiers finally left, Henri sat in the barn for a long time, shaking. That night, he didn't dare go near the windmill. But 2 days later, a man arrived at his door under the pretense of buying grain. He was from the resistance, bringing a new message. "London needs confirmation of the troop trains near Dijon," the man said quietly. "They're preparing for something big." Henri nodded. "I'll send the message tonight." That night, as a cold wind swept through the valley, Henri returned to the windmill. He sat at the radio, hands steady now, and began transmitting. The dots and dashes flickered through the air like whispers of rebellion. But as he finished, a sound made him freeze, the faint crunch of boots outside. He turned off the radio instantly, heart pounding. Through a crack in the wooden wall, he saw shadows moving, 2 soldiers, maybe 3. A flashlight beam swept across the ground. He slipped down into the false floor and pulled the boards shut above him. The space was barely large enough for him to breathe. The door creaked open. Boots thudded on the floorboards above him. He heard Keller's voice. "So, this is where you hide, old friend," Keller said softly. "I thought you might." Henri held his breath. Keller's steps moved closer to the radio table. The officer spoke in German to the others. "No equipment. He's hidden it." There was silence, then the sound of something being overturned. "Find it," Keller ordered. A soldier began stomping on the floorboards, testing for hollows. 1 step. 2, and then a loud crack as a board gave way. Henri knew he was caught. He burst upward, shoving through the broken wood, pistol in hand. The soldiers shouted. Keller turned just as Henri fired, the bullet grazing his arm. Keller stumbled back, and Henri ran for the door. He sprinted into the fields, gunfire erupting behind him. Bullets tore through the night air. He ducked behind a stone wall, panting, heart hammering. He knew he couldn't go home. The Germans would be there already. For 3 nights, he hid in the woods, living off bread and water. He thought of Elise and Marianne, praying they were safe. When Jacques finally found him, Henri was weak but alive. The resistance had heard about the raid. They helped move Henri south, through hidden routes, toward the free zone. Back in Saint-Remy, the Germans burned the windmill. Keller ordered it destroyed, as an example. But Elise and Marianne were spared, thanks to Keller's curious mercy. He claimed there was no proof they were involved. Months later, Henri reached a safe house near Toulouse. There, in another hidden barn, he built a new transmitter, smaller this time, but powerful enough to reach London. From that moment on, his code name became Miller. The Allies invaded France the following year. When liberation finally came to Saint-Rémy in August 1944, the ruins of the old windmill still stood, blackened by fire. Henri returned home weeks later, thin and tired, but alive. Marianne ran to him first. Elise stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. They held each other for a long time in silence. Years later, after the war, Henri rebuilt the windmill. Not to grind grain, but as a memorial. Inside, he placed the remains of the old radio set, the one that had carried whispers of hope through the dark years. Every year, on the anniversary of the liberation, the villagers of Saint-Rémy gathered there. They called it Le Moulin de la Liberté, the windmill of freedom. Few knew the full story of what had happened inside its walls. But those who did would always remember the farmer who dared to speak when others were silent, and the windmill that once carried his secret voice across the airwaves of war. Even long after Henri was gone, the windmill stood tall against the horizon, its new blades spinning in the gentle breeze, a silent guardian of freedom, and a reminder that even the quietest places can hold the loudest courage.